Welcome back to the Health Longevity Secrets Show with Dr. Robert Lufkin. What if everything you learned was wrong? Michelle Hurn is a registered and licensed dietitian with 11 years of experience as a clinical acute care dietitian, lead dietitian in psychiatric care, and outpatient dietitian. She is author of The Dietitian's Dilemma. What would you do if your health was restored by doing the opposite of everything that you were taught? Michelle is also an avid endurance athlete. She has qualified for the Boston Marathon 12 times, and on November 7th, 2020, she recently won her first ultramarathon covering 44.63 miles in a grueling 6-hour timed race. Before we begin, I would also like to mention that this show is separate from my teaching and research roles at the medical school with which I'm currently associated. It is part of my continuing effort to bring quality, evidence-based information about health and longevity to the general public. Now, please enjoy this interview with Michelle Hurn. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on.
I can certainly relate to the work you're doing because my mother was a dietitian, and my experience in being raised in her household was that she loved her children very much, and she very much wanted to do the best and most healthy things for us, which at the time meant we were raised on margarine, low-fat foods, including low-fat milk, an occasional diet soda only, and we avoided sugary cereals, and we religiously followed the guidelines of the USDA and, at the time, the food pyramid. But that is all changing now and evolved, as we're about to hear. I'm also a big fan of your book, The Dietitian's Dilemma. And I understand it's just come out on a audio version also. Is that available now?
Yeah, the audio version is now up on Audible as well as iTunes.
Great, great. Well, before we dive into this, maybe you could start us off by telling us a little bit about how you came to be interested in such a fascinating area.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, dietitians are traditionally very healthy, whole grain, sugar in moderation, low fat, all as many fruits and vegetables as possible for all disease states. And I kind of traditionally followed that path as well. I'm a long distance athlete. I'm a marathon runner. And it actually wasn't until I lost my own health in 2019. I had qualified for the Boston Marathon 12 times. I wanted to qualify for the Olympic trials in the marathon. So to do that as a woman, you have to run under 2 hours and 45 minutes. So that's a 17-mile pace for 26 miles. And I was eating so many carbs. I was eating, all these quote unquote healthy carbs, and I was training really hard, and I was working, and my body wasn't recovering well. I was extremely sore. I had suffered with anxiety my entire life. And if I really want to back up, I actually had a very serious eating disorder when I was much younger. And so, as I was training, I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't recovering. My body hurt. And so I reached out to my family doctor. I actually reached out to 2 different sports dietitians just to get some feedback. And they both said, you need more carbs. And I'm like, are you sure? I'm eating 350 grams of carbs. I'm eating 6 times a day. Oh no, you need more carbohydrates. So I ate up to 450 grams of carbohydrates a day. And my health went from bad to worse. I was breaking out in cold sweats. I couldn't sleep. And as I share in the book, kind of the come to Jesus moment was I came home from work. I fell asleep early, woke up at 2 a.m, my searing muscle pain. And I couldn't get it to stop. I actually drove to 7-Eleven and got 30 pounds of ice and put it in the bathtub. And I was just like, I can't do this anymore. My wife came in and sat with me and was like, maybe we should do something differently. And at that time I was 36. I said, I'm too old for this. I'm too old to keep training. I'm too old to keep running. Clearly my body is burnt out. And so at that point, I intuitively knew that carbohydrates didn't make me feel great, but I also, it's just the indoctrination of you need them. You need this cereal, you need these whole grains, you need all this stuff. But I was like, well, if I'm not running as much, maybe I can or running at all. Perhaps I can give my body just a break. I can eat more fat and more protein. I decided I would just go ketogenic for, 30 days to see if that would help my body. And it's so crazy now that I've been in this world for a while is I was afraid. There's so much fear mongering in the world of dietetics. And even when I mentioned that idea to my coworkers, oh, what if that's so much fat? You could get heart disease. You're not gonna have any energy. How's your brain gonna function all without glucose? It's like all these myths we have. And so, yeah, I actually decided, I came across the world of the carnivore diet, and I was blown away. I was like, there's people that just eat meat and fat. They don't eat any plants at all. And, but it was interesting, and I would encourage, your listeners and viewers and anybody, we see something online and we get so like, that's either right or that's wrong. But I was curious because I said, my health is bad. My anxiety is at an all-time high. I'm 36 and I'm having trouble walking. My body hurts so bad. So I started asking. I got online and I saw these people that were on a ketogenic or carnivore diets, and their health was amazing. And then I saw an athlete named Zach Bitter, who is the current 100-mile world record holder, and he was following a low-carb diet. My mind was literally blown. And so, yeah, that was kind of how I got started. I just said, okay, you know what? Let's do this for 30 days and see how it goes. That was my only intention, was 30 days. Maybe this will help my muscle pain, and then we'll go back to something else.
Well, yeah, well, I want to come back to that and talk about your ultra marathons and all, and the diets for that. But beforehand, perhaps we could start off for our audience by telling them just what is a dietitian and what does a dietitian do?
Yeah, absolutely. So to become a registered dietitian, you go and you get your 4-year degree, and then you have to go through the dietetic internship, and then you sit for the RD exam. And every dietitian, every health professional I've met, from dietitian to nurse to doctor, we all genuinely want to help. Like, you go into this profession because you're like, I want to help people. I want to help heal people. But, working in acute care, it's not good. Unfortunately, my job's in acute care. You usually are getting to see a patient for maybe 5 minutes or so. And your only goal is just to make sure they're getting protein and calories. When I was a young dietitian, I used to think like, oh, I'm going to go in and we're going to talk about nutrition and I'm going to teach them. But you just don't have time. For every patient you see, you've got 30 plus minutes to chart for, insurance reimbursement. And, you're not even really trying, at least in acute care, to food quality. It doesn't really matter. Are they getting protein and calories? It doesn't matter if it's sugar. It doesn't matter if it's, just these ineffective soy proteins. And that was really disheartening because I saw over time, just patients coming back in, with diabetes or kidney problems. People weren't getting better. And the dietitian, the Academy of Nutrition, which is the governing board of all dietetics, is very heavily sponsored. When I became a dietitian in 2009, their number one sponsors were Coca-Cola, Hershey's, Kellogg's, Sara Lee. And I couldn't I said, what is going on? And I kind of made a fuss, you're in your 20s. And I was told, oh, it's not a conflict of interest. It doesn't matter. And as I went through my dietetic internship, I would see these things and I would ask questions. I would say like, hey, we have this patient who's been diabetic for 20 years. Why are we giving them 75 grams of carbohydrates every meal and dosing them with insulin? Why don't we remove their carbohydrates? And I was immediately told as a student, like, that's dangerous. That's not what we do. And, you're a student, you're young. Then I would go into the ICU and I would flip over the bags of tube feeding. And I would say, hey, if you have to be fed, you can't eat even in a traumatic accident. Are we sure that these ingredients, maltodextrin, corn syrup, soy protein, canola oil, is this what we should be feeding our critically ill patients? And once again, it was just like, I was kind of pegged as this intern, Michelle, is really difficult. She doesn't, she asks all these questions. And I was told more often than not, like, look, you just need to go with the flow. Like, you need to be quiet. Like, you're starting to stir things up here. And yeah, things haven't changed. The nutrition guidelines we could do a whole podcast on the history. It has to do with politics. It has to do with religion. It has very little to do with actual health. And, we now, obviously, we have more studies on a low carb diet, showing that it's efficacious, it works, it's safe, it's sustainable. But because there's so much money in the Academy of Nutrition, our corporate sponsors, and we've got new ones as a 2021, Barilla, the pasta company, is a new one. The NCA, the National Confections, basically the sugar, is a new one. And you can't win. You're fighting against a very big institution. And I found, at least on a large hospital level, you know, you're not allowed. I'm not allowed to go in the hospital and teach low carb. You know, you have to teach these guidelines that we know are keeping people sick. So I've had many dietitian students that reach out to me and say, like, I don't know what to do. You know, I ethically, I don't feel good about this. And hence my book, The Dietitian's Dilemma. What do you do?
Yeah, this is very tragic, because in the healthcare system, we all look to the dietitians as the specialists in nutrition for sort of the wisdom and the advice that we can all take for our patients. And the fact that the advice is incorrect is a real problem. And like you say, it's not that everyone wants to do the best for their patients and for themselves, but without access to the proper information, they can't make the right decisions. How do you think this can ever change? What needs to be done? What would you like to see happen to make a difference here?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I could like wave a magic wand, you know, I would have you nailed it. You don't know what you don't know. You know, like once I learned, like, oh my God, look at all these studies, look at all this, like, nobody ever taught me as a dietitian the impact of foods on neurotransmitters in your brain. Nobody taught me the importance of saturated fat and specific amino acids. And, you know, you learn very briefly about insulin, but it's not really like, you know, dug into your brain, and it certainly isn't carried into practice. So yeah, if I could wave a magic wand, I would change our education, because if every dietitian is educated about low carbohydrate diets. I had patients, and I'm sure you've seen patients that died of complications of diabetes, screaming, ravaged in pain. I had a guy that came into the hospital after stepping on a piece of glass. He stepped on the piece of glass 7 days ago, but he had no feeling in his feet, and he ended up dying because he was septic. He had an infection in the blood. We can reverse diabetes in 8 days, not 8 weeks, not 8 months, 8 days on a low carbohydrate diet. And we're keeping people diabetic for 20 years because of money and profits and propaganda. So what we need to do is we need to educate. We need to teach people. Patients deserve a right to know their options. You know, and I'm not dogmatic. Like if you have the capacity to make a choice, and you know, you're not, and when I say that, I also worked in 2 different psychiatric hospitals. So not everybody has capacity, but if you have the capacity and you want to continue to use insulin and eat sugar and carbohydrates, and you know the consequences, then that's your choice. But I've had people come to me and be like, nobody told me, nobody taught me. I suffered for years and I was able to heal so quickly. So I want dietitians to be empowered, because you know what's exhausting is seeing your patients get worse and die. And I saw this just cycle of sickness in the hospital, and it starts to wear on you, and not just physically and mentally. You know, patients in the psychiatric care rarely get better. And, you know, now with Chris Palmer, we're seeing so many anecdotal studies, and we're going to have clinical trials soon with the ketogenic diet and psychiatric care. And I can't tell you how many people, myself included, anxiety is like, oh my gosh, it's so much better when I'm not constantly chasing my blood sugar and when my neurotransmitters are stable. So I want people to be taught correctly. I want people to be taught, you know, both sides. Once again, not dogmatic. I think you need to have a right to choose, and I think you need to understand the power of your options.
Yeah, that's really key. Certainly, I would agree with that. That like you say, nobody wants to make a decision that harms themselves intentionally, but most people just don't know of the possibilities of how their lifestyle can affect their health so much. And like you say, the vested interests, the large manufacturers of processed foods and insulin and the all the interests that benefit by continuing this model have very little motivation to come up with a solution that's going to decrease it. I would
even argue that they have motivation to not. Right. You know, it's not they have the motivation. I can't. And if you just once again, take the emotion out of it, how do I make money as a processed food or an insulin company? I cannot heal you If you no longer need my product, I lose money. I can't kill you. If you are dead, I know you no longer get money. I have to keep you perpetually sick. Like, it's just capitalism, and that's the country we live in, you know? And so I think people have to take a step back, and you really you have to advocate for your own health. But, you know, interestingly, in the hospital, like the hospital I used to work at, if somebody wanted to smoke a cigarette, we don't allow you to smoke cigarettes. Like, yeah, we all recognize that's not good for you. You know, we'll offer you smoking cessation while you're here in this hospital. You will not smoke a cigarette. But while you're here in this hospital, even if you're diabetic, we're going to give you you can order cake and cookies and whatever you want. We'll just give you insulin. So it's very interesting. It's almost like we don't really teach people in the hospital, you know, I'm often told, you know, like, oh, Michelle, they can get counseling at an outpatient diabetics place, or, you know, they'll see an outpatient dietitian. Awesome. They're going to get the same, you know, high sugar, carbohydrates in moderation. And, you know, we all know that moderation doesn't work. Your body can't do that on a physiological or psychological level. The body is not designed to utilize these processed foods well. It doesn't work. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think education is the key. It may not be the complete solution, but the work you're doing with your book and appearing on shows like this will hopefully help get the message out to people. So I've heard one suggestion even for diabetes, instead of calling type 2 diabetes, call it carbohydrate intolerance. And if people visualize it as just they can't process carbohydrates and then they avoid it, they would cure their diabetes in most cases for type 2 diabetes, you know?
Yeah, unfortunately, most dietitians don't even know. Like, if you ask a lot of dietitians, like, how many carbohydrates do you need a day? You'd probably get a range of answers. I mean, very few people would tell you 0. You know, you do not need any carbohydrates to survive. And if you cannot tolerate them, you know, context is very important. Context is important when it comes to, you know, talking about LDL and heart disease. Context is important when we talk about diabetes, you know, and if you are a type 2 diabetic, you can no longer tolerate carbohydrates. It makes 0 sense to continue eating them, utilizing them. But unfortunately, you know, when you have dietitians telling you, oh, we just need to eat these and give you medication, I've never seen somebody heal that way. Just, you know, putting that out there for your audience. If you or anyone you know is type 2 diabetic, I've never seen somebody become non-diabetic continuing to eat carbohydrates and take insulin and metformin. So, but you can reverse it very quickly.
Right.
You know,
right.
You go low carb. So yeah, it's unfortunate.
Do you see time restricted feeding or fasting to play a role in your diet, in your practice, or for any of these health conditions?
I mean, I believe in it hardcore. And, you know, as far as most dietitians are going to tell you to eat, you know, diabetics, you know, 6 times a day. And, you know, unfortunately, every time you eat, every time you get that insulin response, you're basically telling your body to store fat, I guess. And that's another thing, is most people don't even understand insulin. Insulin is a powerful hormone, and we use it just like it's nothing, right? Insulin, like, it'll immediately switches off your body. Like, it basically says, like, stop burning fat, burn sugar, you know, push that sugar into the blood. So, you know, once we see very quickly when people start intermittent fasting, you know, either skipping breakfast, maybe having 2 meals, especially when they start shifting what they eat to more protein and fat. I mean, we see levels of glucose, fasting insulin, which is not a lab that's done very often. It's something you have to request. But I've seen that A1C is one I've seen improve dramatically, triglycerides. And those are really what we want to look at when we come to heart disease specifically. You know, people lose their mind about LDL. It's like, you know, if your LDL is high, but your A1C and your fasting insulin and your triglycerides are low, you're a very healthy human. You know, we were never sick as a population when we, you know, think about evolution. We ate meat and fat, seasonal fruits and vegetables that look very different than they did today. You know, they had almost 0 carbohydrates. They were very bitter, very small. And we had 0 chronic disease, you know, and then you add these processed foods and we have half the population that's like, meat is bad for you, fat is bad for you. It's like, wait a second, no disease with meat and fat. And we can look at the, you know, cultures that still eat a lot of meat and fat, like the, you know, the Inuit Eskimos or the Maasai out in Kenya. And They're perfectly healthy. We add processed food, carbohydrates specifically, and disease goes off the charts. So it's just like, it's amazing the propaganda that's out there, that a lot of people truly believe that meat and saturated fat are truly what's driving disease. Some people believe meat causes diabetes, even dietitians. It's just like, where are you getting your information?
Yeah, it's amazing. And like you said with insulin, it's fascinating the way that we used to think of insulin as foundational for diabetes, which it is. But we're also seeing, as we're seeing now, insulin resistance and metabolic abnormalities are foundational in chronic diseases as diverse as Alzheimer's disease and some cancers and stroke and heart disease as well. So it seems to be really at the heart of things. And from what you're saying, this can be controlled largely with diet.
Yes, yeah, diet. I feel like a lot of times too, when I've talked to more traditional dietitians, they'll start to get very defensive, and it'll be like, oh, well, what about sleep and stress? And yes, there are many different things that affect your blood sugar. But the number one thing, in my opinion, and all these other things get better, is when you shift how you eat. And it's not, especially if you've been eating the traditional diet that you and I both grew up on. I ate, total and skim milk growing up, and Diet Coke and Slim Fat. My parents were always on diets. The goal of health is, in my opinion, is you need to keep your insulin levels very low. You want to be utilizing your own body. Your body is very good at burning fat. Even people who are very lean, I'm relatively lean, I'm an athlete. I have enough fat to go out and run over 100 miles just on fat. And there's muscle fatigue and other things. But you've got to keep those insulin levels low. And every time we eat carbohydrates, specifically those more processed carbohydrates, insulin increases. And most people aren't eating carbohydrates. We talk about sugar in moderation. Most people aren't eating carbohydrates or sugar once a week, once a month, once a year. They're eating it daily, 6, 7, 8. There was a study that people are actually taking in sugary, spiking their insulin up to 16 times a day, because they're drinking coffee and they're having a soda and they're having a snack. And so your poor body is constantly in this fat storage mode. It's very stressful. And over time, that contributes to diabetes. And over time, that contributes to heart disease. If you have diabetes, you have up to a 4-fold risk of having heart disease. Also, if you have a mental illness, people think people with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, oh, they're crazy, they die of something crazy. The number one cause of death for people with mental health disorders is heart disease. Once again, they're at an increased risk for metabolic syndrome. And we can talk more about that, but everything in our health, we can shift the health of our nation, but we have to shift how we eat. We're not going to medicate our way out of it. We're not going to exercise our way out of it. And we're certainly not going to moderate our way out of it. We have to actively choose to reduce carbohydrates.
How many of your colleagues in dietetics have a similar view of use as yours? It's obviously a minority position, but how much of a minority is it?
In the hospitals I worked at, or maybe in the few renegades I found online? In the hospitals I worked at, 0. I was literally pegged as a weirdo. A couple of dietitians seemed to rally around the fact that maybe I would do this for a run or a race, but I'd walk into the office and they're eating, bagels and donuts and oatmeal. And I'm in there with my beef and butter. And I'm like, oh, that's different, But yeah, most dietitians, I had one dietitian tell me he would never prescribe a ketogenic diet to anybody because it would kill them. And when I questioned him further, it causes heart disease. And well, can I show you all these studies that it doesn't? No, I don't want to see those, very defensive. So yeah, I would say 0. It's not a popular idea among dietitians. And I don't blame them, because their education. And also, if you start to take in the truth and you start to see oh, wow, I can actually heal people with the low carb diet, there's going to be a lot of cognitive dissonance, because you can't teach that in the hospital. I was told look, you can't teach this. And I couldn't do it. I had to leave the hospital because I was like, I know that I'm hurting people with this high carb, sugar in moderation information. I can't keep teaching what doesn't work and could what ultimately hurt people. And I'm not judging anybody who learns that and stays in the system. I mean, like I said, what are you supposed to do? You worked, I got student loans out the wazoo, right? Like you got to figure it out. But yeah, there's definitely more. I've been very encouraged. There's some renegade dietitians online. I have a few in my book, some amazing people that get certified as nutrition therapy practitioners, because they're not sponsored by all this processed food nonsense. So they get to learn the actual facts. So yeah, I've been encouraged by those people, but I'm regularly sent emails from well-meaning dietitians with some criticizing me. But that's all right. Anytime you step outside the box and you're doing something different, I'm very confident in what I'm doing, and I have lots of science to back it up.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to see at least some other organizations springing up to support this view. And I was going to say you could have a society of dietitians for ketogenic diets or something like that to do that. Maybe we'll see that in the future, or hopefully all dietitians will embrace it.
I would hope so.
There's so much misinformation, even among my physician colleagues. When I talk about a ketogenic diet, they're going, oh no, you don't want ketoacidosis, and they're conflating, two very different things. Are you in ketosis or are you in ketoacidosis? And there's just so much confusion. We've at least so far failed to educate. And these are, with the dietitians and the physicians, these are the experts that people go to for advice about their health and their lifestyle choices. And if they can't even deliver the appropriate thing. So obviously there's a lot of work cut out for us to be done. Well, tell me a little bit about your ultra marathon that you just won. Congratulations. And also 12 Boston marathons that you qualified for. And that's so exciting. And maybe you could speak a little bit about your choices with your diet and how that informs your running.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you. So yeah, like I shared earlier, when I lost my health, I really had no ambitions of running again. I was in so much pain. And so it was just as I followed, a carnivore and then transitioned into a low carb diet, I was just around the house more. And so my wife, who likes her solitude, was like, you should go for a run, just kind of like casually threw it out there. And I hadn't run in over a month. So I was like, oh, I'll go jog. Why not? Maybe I'll be like a hobby jogger. And I ran 8 miles and I felt really good. And so the wheels started turning, like, oh goodness, like what, could I do this low carb? Like I've never thought about this. And I also I'm very competitive. So I was like, I don't want to run really slow. But, I reached out to Zach Bitter and he agreed to coach me, and we just, let's take it one day at a time. Let's see how it goes. Let's try this crazy low carb journey. And I was amazed by how much better my recovery was. I was eating so much more protein and a lot less carbs than I ever have, and just felt amazing. And just kind of took it one day at a time. And yeah, a little bit more specifics, because yeah, it's funny, I profess low carb, so if you're curious on what I do, so when I'm in a really low training volume, I would say like 30 miles or less, I'm very ketogenic, definitely under between 25 and 50 grams of carbohydrates. We get a cow share from a farm just kind of down, well, not really down the road, about an hour and a half away. So we get like a lot of meat at one time. We have a chest freezer from Costco in our basement. So eat a lot of beef. My diet is pretty beef heavy. A lot of beef, a lot of butter, a little bit of fruit. And then for like supplemental carbs for my running, my wife makes long fermented sourdough, and I have some rice sometimes. But yeah, it's mostly I eat liver. We eat some organ stuff, but really meat heavy. And I found that's what works really well for me. I know some people do like either a 0 carb or no grains. And I've done that, I'll do that when my volume's really low, but I find once I'm running, 60, 70 miles, like I do a little better when I add some carbohydrates back in. I use a product called S Fuels. It's an electrolyte, coconut oil, some collagen protein when I'm running. And I found that settles in my stomach really well. And yeah, I just, I'm grateful. Like, if you had told me that day that I got the ice and I decided I wasn't going to run, if you had said like, hey, you know what, you're going to switch to a low carb diet and you're actually going to go run like an ultra marathon, I would have told you like, you're smoking something like that. There's no way. I can't even walk around the block. My health was so bad. But yeah, it's just, and I guess that would be my message to anybody, is just the hope and how quickly my health changed. My mental health, like the anxiety was gone within weeks. And I just, after about a month, I just felt physically stronger. And I just felt like with all the protein, and all the iron and all the, there's so much in meat. People are like, oh, meat and soy is protein, beef is protein. That's not true. They're very different proteins. Beef has folate and, all the different B vitamins and carnitine and creatine and taurine and all these amino acids. Ruminant animals are, in my opinion, are essential for health. So that's kind of what I do. And, when I decided to write the book, I actually wasn't even going to include a chapter on running, but a lot of people told me like, oh, we're kind of curious what you do to run. So I do have like what I eat in a day and kind of my training. But yeah, the goal of the book was just I wanted to talk about topics I felt I could speak really well on. There's so many things low carb can do, but we do diabetes, mental health, including major depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, eating disorders, which is a very controversial topic. I'm actually going to give a talk on binge eating disorder and the ketogenic diet, because we now have our first case study that was published on that. Sarcopenia, because I saw way too many people in the hospital setting that were overly fat, under muscled, couldn't even walk a few steps to the bathroom. And heart disease, because, everyone thinks all that meat and fat is going to make your heart explode. Oh, and I also have a chapter on where the guidelines came from. Just like we said, it's bizarre. It's very bizarre. So yeah, that's what I do. I run anywhere between 8 and 20 miles a day, and I work part-time now, kind of, just hustling. Hopefully at some point I'll figure out what I want to do when I grow up and be able to settle. But it's good. I'm very blessed, and I'm a very happy person.
People say the choices when we optimize something will be different depending on what we're optimizing for. So when you're optimizing your nutrition for an ultra marathon, let's say, how does that differ from optimizing your nutrition for health and longevity?
Yeah, I would say health and longevity. Like if my only goal is health, I would be purely ketogenic, maybe even slightly higher on the protein. A ketogenic diet tends to be 60 to 70% fats, 20% protein, and like 10% carbs or less. So when I'm optimizing for my ultra marathon, I'll get up to 25% carbs. I'll eat up to 150 grams of carbs a day when I'm leading up to that major race. And of course, race day, you're running for 6-7 hours. All I'm eating basically is carbs. Like after that day, I'm ready to be done with carbs. So I wouldn't recommend that for health. I'm sure, I also don't know how great running, 20, 30 miles a day is for your health. I'm sure that's people come at me with the cardio fatigue or whatever. So yeah, that may not be the best for your health. So yeah. And that's why as soon as I'm done running, take some time off and just flex back into ketosis. I think for health specifically, being in ketosis most of the time, being metabolically flexible, so I think it's fine to eat seasonally, to have a little bit of fruit, between 25 and 50 grams of carbs, I think is very tolerable for most people who are metabolically healthy. Unfortunately, you have a population that 88% is not metabolically healthy. But I think to get there, ruminant animals, so that's beef, lamb, venison, eggs, butter, tallow, all those things they tell you not to eat. And then, if you tolerate plant foods, I eat berries, carrots, a little bit of rice and sourdough for my running, kind of figuring that out from there. But as you didn't hear me, there was no Oreos, granola bars, donuts, it's just, it's amazing. I'm so out of that world that sometimes I forget, I'll go to a grocery store and look in people's carts and you're like, there's no food in there. There's like a boxed pizza, Cheetos, bagel bites, jelly, there's like, we have to eat food. And ideally we're eating food that's keeping our blood sugar stable and insulin low. And that's meat and fat.
Yeah. For your ketosis, do you use any tools to check that, like blood sticks or acetone breath meters or anything to monitor whether you're actively in ketosis, or you just sort of know it as you go along?
I can feel it for the most part. We have some of the sticks I've measured before, like in when I'm really low carb, like after the season, I'm definitely like it shows on the keto meter. But yeah, during training, I'm not too worried about it, just because like you know, I'm running so much, I may or may be flexing in and out of it with my carb intake. But yeah, I like to make sure in the off season I am, just because I think that's like a good recovery time.
And how about CGMs or continuous glucose monitors? Do you
I would
ever
love
use
to use
those?
one. If anyone's watching this and that has one, sponsored by one, hit me up. Because I think it'd be crazy to see how my blood sugar is, especially like throughout an ultra marathon. But I've never personally used one. My nephew is a type 1 diabetic, so I love watching his. Is fascinating. Just how different foods affect his blood sugar. But I've never personally used one.
Yeah, it's interesting. The more and more companies are coming out, sort of they're like coaching companies for lifestyle and also for treating type 2 diabetes. And part of their plan is continuous glucose monitors for their patients that then feed back. And so hopefully we'll be seeing a lot more of that. And I mean, there's rumor that the Apple Watch at some point may have it as well. And
Would be amazing.
wouldn't that be amazing? And Android watches also using Raman spectroscopy with it. So that'll
feedback in real time is helpful. Like people, because it's one thing to say like, hey, a banana will really raise your blood sugar. And then, my 10-year-old nephew's type 1 diabetic, eats a banana. You like, whoop, you see it like, whoa, look at that, So it's very different when you actually, like, for me to say something to somebody, but when they actually see it, I think that could help make change. It's, I imagine the insurance companies might push back against that. And heaven forbid we actually help people get off insulin. But
yeah, that's true. The other thing I've experimented with them, and it was interesting to learn how my body responds to certain foods. I mean, some foods I know will spike my glucose, other foods I know won't, but then other foods, it was a surprise. I go, whoa, this one really went up, and this one I thought would be bad, but it wasn't. So there's a little bit of individuality that the CGMs can help out with as well. And how about the last few minutes? Anything on your personal lifestyle choices? We've talked about a bunch of them. How about supplements? Any particular things you use there?
Yeah, I am a big fan of like organ meats. I eat liver almost daily. It's definitely not my favorite thing. I think if you don't do liver, I think an iron or just even like capsules, just because that's so dense in the iron and B12. And I was shocked that 25% of the world is deficient in iron. It's the number one mineral deficiency worldwide. And for kiddos under 4, it's 50%, magnesium, I would say, I guess electrolytes as a runner, I do potassium, magnesium, sodium, salt my food pretty heavily, and then use magnesium at night. But yeah, that's about it. I don't do a whole lot, certainly when it's warmer. I mean, I live in the Pacific Northwest. We've had some heat waves out here lately, but in general, the weather's pretty mild. So I don't have to do a ton of that. But yeah, I feel pretty. And that's one nice thing about eating, a lower carb diet is that it's nutrient dense. The nutrition is bioavailable. So I'm not, really worried about having to supplement. But yeah, I would say liver and then electrolytes.
Well, this has been fascinating, Michelle. How can our audience follow you on social media or find out what you're doing in the future?
Yeah. Thank you. So my website, thedietitiansdilemma.net, and you can contact me directly through there. There's links to buy. I've got my book up on Amazon, paperback, ebook, for now the audiobook. And then on Instagram, I'm most active on Instagram at Run, Eat, Meet, Repeat. And that's all one word, Run, Eat, Meet, Repeat. And then on Twitter at Michelle Hurn RD.
Great. And then we'll be seeing you at upcoming conferences as well, many conferences for lay people that I understand you'll be speaking at in the future too. That'll be great.
I'm excited. I've applied for the KetoCon that's supposed to take place in July. I'll be going with Dr. Barry on the Lowcarb cruise this coming May 2022.
Where's the cruise to? Where are you going to go on the cruise?
Virgin Islands. Yeah.
Nice.
Very exciting. Yes, that I'm very happy to go on and speak on.
Now, is the cruise going to be all low carb? I mean, is that part of the deal?
We've got several, or from what I understand, there's several speakers, and I'm sure the food will be low carb.
So the whole boat.
I have no idea, but I imagine.
The whole ship will be all low carb then, right? That's great.
Yeah, we'll see. It should be fun. But yeah, I mean, and I'm always looking for opportunities to continue to advocate, spread the word, hopefully we'll still have lots of conferences. I know we'll see if hopefully things are going to stay open as, as we move forward into the next year. So we'll see.
Well, it's great you're getting the word out however you do it, and it's so good to follow your work and your book and all. And thanks again, Michelle, so much for taking the time to spend an hour with us and be on the program today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Note, this is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking of it because of something you have seen here. If you find this to be of value of you, please hit that like button and subscribe to support the work we do on this channel. Also, we take your suggestions and advice very seriously. Please let us know what you'd like to see on this channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll hope to see you next time.